Alright, so today I'm back with another Destiny video because Bungie just dropped a massive TWAB yesterday after a couple weeks of not saying anything because of the holiday. And there's a lot to go through, but of course, what do I want to focus on? That would be sunsetting. I've already written an article about this today, but there's been an ongoing conversation on Twitter, and I feel like there's even more to say and kind of a way to express my written points, kind of with even more elaboration. So I wanted to go into that a little bit here, and if some people would rather watch my thoughts than read them, I don't blame you. So the main thing that happened with the TWAB is before the TWAB happened, Dylan came out and announced that they were going to be talking about bringing back Dreaming City and Moon weapons. And so everyone's like, okay, like what's that going to be like? Like, is the, whatever thing in my vault going to be useful again? Like, how are we going to farm these? Like, what's the best, Moon weapon or Dreaming City weapon that could be good in this meta? And everyone's talking about, all their favorite weapons from that. And then they release the information, and there's only 4 weapons from each location coming, and then 1 from each destination is a rocket launcher. So 3 weapons, really, barring any big rocket launcher buffs that might be coming, which is possible. But it kind of sparked this whole conversation about sunsetting in general, and in particular reissuing in its relationship to sunsetting. And there were a ton of big name Destiny people kind of pushing back on this. Like, there's always been, low level grumbling about sunsetting pretty much since it was announced. You've had people like me who were originally like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then over time, seeing how it's been implemented, have converted to being pretty firmly anti-sunsetting without some major changes. And I think we need to talk a little bit about how we got here and what the path forward could be, should be. And I mean, it's hard to predict given how often things change here. But I think the core comes down to the problem with sunsetting is not necessarily the concept of sunsetting, which is phasing out old gear, both to motivate new chases, but also to help with balancing issues and phasing some too popular things out of the meta to keep the game fresh, replaced by new gear. But the problem has been the execution of sunsetting in terms of how that translates to what we have actually seen with the game so far. And the problem has been the game has relied too heavily on reissuing, and the stuff it has brought in has not been enough of a volume to keep pace with the stuff that's leaving. And it's also about how they're kind of filling the gaps, which is with a lot of weapon reissuing, which is what we've seen so far and what we're continuing to see now with this latest announcement of, these 8 weapons coming back, in addition to who knows what else is coming back. There obviously could be even more stuff kind of added to the world loot pool that has already been sunset, but we don't know. A core disconnect is that it's created a situation where it's not just like bringing old weapons back, it's that if you had saved those old weapons, if those are weapons that you like, that you cannot take those out of your vault and just start using them. You have to regrind for whatever god roll you had, because the old one will never have its power cap raised. And if Bungie changes that, they've set themselves up for like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, where if you have these weapons that you tell people are safe to delete, and then half the community dismantles them, and then half the community doesn't, if you change your mind and then upgrade them to all of a sudden be relevant again, half the people that deleted them feel lied to, and that you told them, it was safe to delete all this stuff when really you changed your mind. So I don't see them changing their mind, and I don't see that happening. But then you have the converse thing where people are like, well, why should I do essentially the same activities to get the same role of a weapon I already had? They did say that the new moon weapons would have new perks, but who's to say that those are necessarily going to be better than the god roll you had, like just because they throw Wellspring or Vorpal in there to something that didn't have it before. I just don't know if you can really know that. And it's kind of the other part of sunsetting that has not really come to pass yet, is the ability of them to introduce new, crazily, super powerful legendary weapons that they weren't able to before. Like, there's been some cool new perks, like the raid weapons obviously have some interesting perks, but it hasn't really quite panned out that way. So it's just created this loop where it's gone a level past just like taking things out of nostalgia. Like, okay, you can have Destiny 1 weapons that come back, and even that's a little controversial. And yet it makes sense because like none of those are in the game. People have memories attached to those. Like they could have a new, interesting place in the Destiny sandbox. Even like Destiny 2 Year 1 weapons kind of makes sense to reissue because that was back, remember when everything had either like one perk or fixed rolls or both, or like it was just way, a totally different weapon system than we have now. So it would make sense to reissue some of those with weapons 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever the hell we're on now. That actually, does kind of make sense, even if it's technically the same sort of thing. But you kind of lose people at, reissuing a gnawing hunger with a new power cap when you didn't change any of the perks on that one. Even if you do change some of the perks like they are doing now, there's no guarantee that it's going to be better. And then they're just doing like just really random weird stuff in between. Like they didn't sunset Last Wish weapons, but now you can regrind Last Wish for weapons that are one season higher than the current weapons that you have that were not sunset. So you essentially have to regrind Last Wish to get an extra season out of those weapons, and you cannot use your existing ones. As you can see, this is all getting very confusing and very complicated, and it doesn't feel good to rerun old activities for old weapons that you have already farmed once. And like sometimes as recently as like 6 months ago, sometimes a year ago, sometimes 2 years ago. But like people, I see the pushback of being like, well, people were like, well, didn't you want, the Forsaken and the Moon weapons to not be sunset? Yeah, but this isn't not sunsetting them. This is reissuing them. Like I thought that the expansion weapons shouldn't be dropping if they were going to drop sunset, because that doesn't make any sense, or none of those should have been sunset, because if there is paid content in the game, all of that should be dropping relevant weapons. And getting through all of this, I just don't fundamentally, at least from my perspective as a player, I don't get the benefit of this kind of massively elaborate sunsetting where we're losing, I forget what the total is, at least like 21, 25, something like that, Season of Dawn weapons. And like looking over the list, it's, some popular weapons that people enjoy, but it's nothing like broken. And I know that like you have to test all weapons for new content, but like it's not like there's any super insane, perks in those pools, or like perks that don't exist anymore, things like that. It's just a slate of weapons, and you're just taking them away, and you may not even end up even replacing that many with the ones you're adding. So it's taking them away for its own sake, and that doesn't feel good. Like I don't know why I have to stop using these weapons, like even if they're not actively causing any real problems in the game. And I think Bungie's trying to push people to have motivation to keep grinding for new stuff. I get that, but I think you're losing more than you gain when you do that by just taking people's weapons away. Like I think I forget who, it may have been Luke Smith himself, where he said something about like, I was talking to someone who just used Breakneck and they just didn't want anything besides Breakneck, because it was just the best auto rifle. But like I don't think the solution to that is to just like take Breakneck, shove it in a vault or dismantle it, and then tell them they have to get something that's better, more interesting than Breakneck. Like that is not a good, like the solution is worse than the problem in that sense. And I think there have been problematic weapons in Destiny and meta dominating weapons. And when sunsetting was first announced, this was the peak of, you had to use Recluse and Mountaintop in like pretty much any PvE encounter, or that you like high level PvE encounter you were trying to get past. And then in PvP everyone was using either Revoker or Mountaintop in everything, and that was like the thing. So yeah, sunsetting those specific weapons did feel like, okay, like that's great. And like I think I made jokes like I'd sacrifice 1,000 weapons like just to get Mountaintop out of PvP or something. But then they actually did that. They sacrificed like hundreds and hundreds of weapons in order to combat, these very select few weapons that may have just been able to be sunset individually. But then they've also just excluded exotics from this. So we still have all the same problems. The problem is just now it's Arbalest instead of, Mountaintop or something. Like they're just breaking their own rules they set up in like such a weird, obvious way that it hasn't really solved any of the problems that sunsetting was meant to solve in the first place. And I know it's just been one season of this, and some of the people that are pushing back against me are like, okay, well, you have to give it more time. Like, of course it was going to be the worst with Beyond Light because they deleted so many weapons and they were never going to replace all of them. That's true, but it's fundamentally weird to me that now every advent of a new season is just, okay, what 25 weapons are we losing? And then you have to cross your fingers and hope that the 25, if that, weapons that replace them are going to be just as good or just as memorable. And if they're not, well, you were at a net negative for loot that season. And I am completely glossing over armor, which I think is a whole other category, because once, now that we have 2.0, where you can slot anything into anything and change elemental type, and once we get transmog, the season after this one, the whole armor pursuit just doesn't even make sense at all anymore, because all you need is one set for transmog and then like an elemental set with the stat distribution you want, 3 times, and then you never really have to worry about armor again. So that's a whole other thing, and sunsetting is annoying there in the sense that like investing shards into something and then having it be sunset is bad, but to me, I think weapons are the more pressing issue, and armor is like not great either, but I think the armor pursuit has more base problems at its core besides even what sunsetting is producing. And without sunsetting, you literally would never need to farm more than like 3 sets of armor again once transmog gets here, if you even care about how you look. So that's its own thing, and that's why I don't talk about that as often, but I just think sunsetting has created a lot more problems than it solves, both in terms of like how the community feels, in terms of how Bungie is doing, work, because now they've realized that sunsetting has created a very strong need for a lot more weapons than they're currently making. So it's created more work for them because now they have to assign even more people to the weapons team, which they said they're doing. So yeah, maybe they're spending as much time balancing things like Revoker and Mountaintop anymore, or whatever archetype, but like they're also they still have just as much work to do. So I don't know what this solved, and it just ultimately seems like a net negative to me from what we've seen so far. This may change. They might start introducing way more weapons with way more wild perks that make us forget all about the stuff we've lost, but this is just going to be a consistent thing. And if you think this season is bad, where we're losing 2025 Season of Dawn weapons, imagine how next season's going to be when we lose all the Arrival's Warmind Cell weapons, and that pretty much just ceases to exist. And it's just going to keep being like this. And then every expansion, you're going to lose the giant expansion pool from before, and that'll probably still keep being sold, and those weapons will keep dropping, which is the situation we have now with Shadowkeep and Forsaken. So it's, in theory, there are good elements to sunsetting, but in practice, almost none of it has panned out in a way that, people were predicting that it could be good for the health of the game, envisioned, even Bungie. And I don't know what's going to happen here. They have not really talked about reversing sunsetting or anything like that. Like sometimes they add in new, caps to certain things, and they'll bring certain things back. Evie, did you make a cameo? You got your one Evie cameo if you stayed all the way to the end of the video. So good job. There she is. Evie, don't lick your paws. That's how you got the cone. Yeah, I see you. Anyway, sunsetting, not going great. Does not seem to be getting much better. These reissues are probably not going to feel amazing. And I don't know. We have to see what else is going to be reissued that season. We have to see what the new loot is. It could be spectacular, and then we won't be complaining. But Evie, I see you. Don't do it. Anyway, that's my extended thoughts on sunsetting. It will not be the last time we talk about this. I think I'm about to go on Fireteam Chat in like an hour and talk about this even more. So catch me there, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.